May 27, 2026, 11:47 p.m. The lights in Sevastopol's administrative district burned low. 4 Storm Shadow missiles were already in the air. 3 senior officers of Russia's Black Sea Fleet were running a night coordination session on the reinforced upper floors of a building that appeared on every public map to be a regional administrative annex. Civilian signage on the facade, civilian vehicles in the parking structure below. 11 weeks of Ukrainian military intelligence surveillance had already stripped that cover away, down to the shift rotation times, the communication frequencies, and the precise floor where fleet coordination staff gathered after midnight when operational tempo demanded it. By 11:52 p.m., the first missile would hit the external communications array on the rooftop. By midnight, the building would be structurally compromised on 3 floors. And within 90 minutes, 3 of Russia's most senior Black Sea Fleet officers would go offline, their command channels falling silent in a way that Russian naval operations would spend the next 48 hours unable to explain. This is the story of one of the most precisely executed decapitation strikes of the entire Ukraine conflict. A strike built on 11 weeks of patience, 2 naval drones used as a diversion, and 4 British-supplied Storm Shadow cruise missiles that flew in from the northwest at 290 meters altitude, terrain masking against the Crimean hills until there was nothing left to mask against. I'm your host at Steelfront, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Pentagon analysts would later describe this strike in briefing documents that found their way into open-source reporting as textbook decapitation targeting, the kind of operation that takes months to build and seconds to execute, the kind that changes what a fleet can do, not by sinking ships, but by removing the people directing them. Stay with me, because what happened in those 90 minutes tells you everything about how Ukraine is fighting this war, and everything about why Russia's Black Sea Fleet has become, by spring 2026, something closer to a defensive liability than an offensive asset. Let's go back to the beginning. By late 2025, Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, the GUR, had refined its approach to high-value target identification in ways that would have seemed implausible 2 years earlier. The Directorate had survived Russian penetration attempts, had weathered the catastrophic losses of the early war years, and had become one of the most operationally effective intelligence services in any active conflict on the planet. Its analysts worked in layers. Satellite imagery from commercial providers cross-referenced against signals intelligence. Human source networks inside occupied Crimea, cultivated in some cases since 2022. Open-source analysts parsing shipping manifests, vehicle registrations, cellular data. The target for what would become Operation Silent Admiral, the Ukrainian internal designation, confirmed in subsequent GUR communications, was first flagged in mid-March 2026. Satellite imagery analysts noticed a pattern in vehicle movements around a particular administrative building in Sevastopol's central district. Not military vehicles, civilian SUVs and sedans, but arriving and departing on a schedule that lined up with known Black Sea Fleet operational coordination windows. The parking garage beneath the building showed persistent occupancy during overnight hours when civilian administrative functions would have no reason to operate. A signals intelligence overlay confirmed it within 2 weeks. The communications coming from the upper floors operated on encrypted military frequencies. At some point, between 2023 and 2025, the building had been quietly converted into a secondary operational command annex, one that Russian planners apparently believed would be invisible because it carried no military designation, sat in a civilian district, and appeared on no official order of battle. They were wrong. Which weapon system was ultimately most decisive here? The Storm Shadow missiles, the Magura V5 naval drones that created the diversion, or the 11 weeks of GUR intelligence work that made the targeting possible? Comment below. Steelfront wants to know what you think. The GUR's surveillance operation ran from mid-March through late May 2026, 11 weeks of accumulating detail that went far beyond confirming the building's military function. Ukrainian intelligence analysts built a complete operational picture. They knew the shift schedule. They knew that the highest concentration of senior staff was present between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., when overnight coordination sessions ran. They knew that the external communications array on the rooftop was the building's primary link to Black Sea Fleet headquarters and to Russian naval units operating in the western Black Sea. They knew the parking garage in the basement housed 6 command vehicles, armored SUVs preloaded with evacuation documents and portable communications equipment, kept ready for rapid departure in an emergency. And they knew something that proved critical to the strike plan. The building's radar signature was masked by its proximity to Sevastopol's coastal air defense network. Russian air defense operators in the area were trained to prioritize threats coming from the sea, from the south and east. A threat that came in from the northwest, flying low and using the Crimean hill terrain for masking, would face a detection window of less than 40 seconds before impact. I spent hours going through the open-source reconstruction of this operation, and one detail kept nagging at me: the specificity of the intelligence about those 6 command vehicles in the basement. That's not something you get from satellite imagery alone. Knowing what's preloaded into which vehicles requires a human source inside the facility or extremely close to it. Someone, at some point during those 11 weeks, was feeding the GUR information from inside. The strike plan that emerged was straightforward in concept and precise in execution. 2 components, running in sequence. First, a naval diversion, then the missile strike. The diversion was assigned to 2 Magura V5 naval surface drones, the same platform that had already proven itself against Russian naval vessels throughout 2025 and into 2026. The Magura V5 is a Ukrainian-developed autonomous surface vehicle approximately 5.5 meters long, capable of carrying up to 320 kilograms of explosive payload at speeds up to 42 knots. But on the night of May 27th, the 2 Magura drones assigned to this operation were not carrying explosive payloads. They were carrying electronic warfare equipment, jammers and emitters configured to generate a radar signature consistent with an incoming maritime threat. At 11:31 p.m., the 2 Magura V5 drones launched from a concealed position and began their approach toward Sevastopol harbor's outer entrance. They came in on a heading that would place them, from a Russian radar operator's perspective, on a trajectory toward the harbor mouth, exactly the threat axis that Black Sea Fleet air defense had been optimized to watch. The drones broadcast electronic signatures calibrated to appear threatening. They moved at aggressive speeds. They looked, on Russian radar screens, like exactly the kind of maritime drone attack that had been harassing Russian naval assets for months. The Russian response was immediate and entirely predictable. Radar operators shifted attention seaward. Coastal defense crews went to elevated readiness. Communications between the harbor defense network and the fleet's operational command annex spiked as duty officers reported the incoming maritime threat. Everyone was looking south. The storm shadows were already airborne. Stay with me through the next 18 minutes, because what happens in that window, from the moment the first storm shadow crossed into Crimean airspace to the moment Russian command channels went silent, is where this story becomes something more than a strike. It becomes a lesson in what modern warfare actually looks like when one side has learned to weaponize patience. The Storm Shadow, known in French service as the Scalp EG, is a subsonic air-launched cruise missile with a range in excess of 550 kilometers, though operational employment typically keeps the launch aircraft well outside contested airspace. The missile flies at low altitude using terrain-following guidance, navigates via inertial navigation system cross-referenced with GPS, and in its terminal phase, uses an imaging infrared seeker to match its aim point against a stored reference image of the target. Its warhead is a BROACH-penetrating munition, a tandem charge that uses a first stage to cut through hardened structures before the main warhead detonates inside. Ukraine received Storm Shadow missiles from the United Kingdom beginning in 2023 and has used them consistently against high-value targets throughout the conflict. What makes the system effective for a strike like this is precisely the combination of capabilities that Russian air defense struggled to defeat: low flight altitude, terrain masking, and terminal precision. 4 missiles were employed. Each was assigned a specific aim point, sequenced to hit in order. Missile 1 was assigned the rooftop communications array, the antenna systems and satellite uplink equipment that formed the building's primary connection to the outside world. Taking this out first would isolate the building before the occupants understood what was happening. Missile 2 and Missile 3 were assigned to the reinforced upper floors, specifically the 3rd and 4th floors, where GUR intelligence had confirmed fleet coordination staff were conducting their overnight session. The BROACH warheads were configured to penetrate the reinforced concrete before detonating inside. Missile 4 was assigned to the basement parking garage, the section where the 6 command vehicles were staged and ready. The launch occurred from Ukrainian-controlled airspace. The precise aircraft and launch point remain classified, but open-source flight tracking and subsequent Ukrainian military statements confirm the 4 missiles were airborne by approximately 11:38 p.m. They flew northwest to southeast, using the terrain of the Crimean interior for altitude masking, maintaining a flight altitude of 290 meters, low enough to complicate radar acquisition, high enough to clear the hill ridgelines they were using as cover. Estimated flight time from launch to target, approximately 14 minutes. At 11:31 p.m., the Magura drones had activated their electronic warfare packages off the harbor entrance. At 11:38 p.m., the Storm Shadows were in the air. The timeline was running. Here's something that doesn't make sense on the surface until you look at it carefully. By May 2026, the Russian Black Sea Fleet had already lost so many surface vessels to Ukrainian naval drone attacks that its operational posture had shifted almost entirely to defensive and logistical functions in the eastern Black Sea. Port visits to Sevastopol had been dramatically reduced. Major surface combatants had relocated to Novorossiysk and other eastern ports. And yet, the command structure responsible for coordinating what remained of Black Sea Fleet operations had stayed in Sevastopol, in a building they believed was hidden in plain sight. What this tells us about how Russian military planning has adapted, or failed to, is worth sitting with. The fleet moved its ships east. It didn't move its command infrastructure. It moved the targets it could see and left exposed the infrastructure it believed was invisible. What Ukraine demonstrated on May 27, 2026, is that in the age of layered intelligence, satellite imagery, signals intercept, human source networks, open source analysis, the idea that a building can be hidden by removing its military designation is simply wrong. If it functions as a military command node, it will eventually be found. How many command vehicles did Ukraine destroy in the basement parking structure? 2, 4, or all 6? The answer is coming. Keep watching Steelfront. At 11:51 p.m., Russian radar operators tracking the 2 Magura V5 drones off the harbor entrance began coordinating an intercept response. Coastal defense assets were queried. Communications between the harbor defense network and the fleet command annex spiked. Duty officers in the building's overnight session were aware of the maritime drone threat developing off the harbor entrance. They were focused south. At 11:52 p.m. and 43 seconds, Missile 1 hit the rooftop communications array. The impact was not, by the standards of what followed, spectacular. The BROACH-warhead's first stage punched through the array's mounting structure. The main charge detonated inside the equipment cluster. The rooftop lost its communications capability in a single second. From ground level, it would have looked like a sharp flash on the rooftop, followed by a column of black smoke from burning electronics and antenna cabling. Inside the building, on the overnight coordination floors above, the effect was immediate. Every communications screen went dark. Every encrypted channel dropped. The duty officers went from actively coordinating a maritime defense response to complete communications blackout in the time it takes to blink. They had, at this moment, no way of knowing that 3 more missiles were 11 seconds away. Subscribe to Steelfront if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because the next 60 seconds of this operation is a masterclass in sequenced precision strike execution. At 11:52 p.m. and 54 seconds, Missile 2 hit the 3rd floor of the building's reinforced upper structure. The BROACH-penetrating warhead worked as designed. The first stage, a shaped charge precursor, cut through the reinforced concrete of the exterior wall and ceiling before the main warhead followed it inside. The detonation sequence, separated by milliseconds, placed the main explosion inside the floor space rather than on the exterior surface. The structural effect was catastrophic. A section of the 3rd floor collapsed into the 2nd. The 4th floor above dropped partially onto the 3rd. The building's interior became a compression event, forces driving inward and downward rather than outward. Combat footage from materials that circulated in open-source channels, cross-referenced with drone footage captured minutes after the strike, shows the building's upper structure losing integrity on its northwestern face, the face Missile 2 entered. The exterior wall of that section, roughly 15 meters of reinforced concrete frontage, collapsed outward into the access road running along that side of the building. 11 seconds after Missile 2, Missile 3 hit the 4th floor. The sequencing was deliberate. Ukrainian strike planners had designed the impact sequence to maximize structural damage to the upper floors, not through the kinetic effect of a single impact, but through the compounding failure of structure already compromised by the first missile. Missile 3 entered a building already losing integrity in its upper section. The BROACH-warhead detonated into a floor space where the ceiling above had already partially collapsed. The result was a progressive structural failure that took the entire upper 2 floors of the northwestern section down in under 4 seconds. Put yourself in the position of a Russian duty officer on that overnight shift, even on a floor that survived the initial impacts. 1 second, you're coordinating a maritime defense response to drone contacts off the harbor. The next second, your communications go dark. 3 seconds later, the building shakes like the earth has moved. Then the sounds, the deep, percussive compression of reinforced concrete failing, the secondary collapse of material above, the sounds of a structure that has decided it can no longer hold itself together. And then, 7 seconds after Missile 3, Missile 4 hit the basement parking garage. The vehicle depot below the main structure was accessed through a ramp on the building's eastern side. The Missile 4 aim point, derived from GUR intelligence about the layout of the garage and the positions of the 6 command vehicles, was calibrated to enter through the garage ceiling, the reinforced slab forming the ground floor of the building above. The BROACH-warhead penetrated that slab and detonated inside the vehicle storage area. The 6 armored SUVs, preloaded with evacuation documents, portable communications equipment, and the operational materials senior Black Sea Fleet staff would need after an emergency evacuation, were inside the garage at the time of impact. 4 were destroyed directly by the warhead detonation and the fireball that followed. The remaining 2 sustained damage from the partial collapse of the garage ceiling section above the explosion point. Ukrainian sources, corroborated by satellite imagery analysis conducted in the hours after the strike, assessed all 6 vehicles as non-functional. The evacuation option had been eliminated. The entire 4-missile sequence, from Missile 1's impact on the rooftop array to Missile 4's detonation in the parking garage, had taken 22 seconds. Here's the take that will probably get some pushback. The fact that Russia maintained a functioning senior command node in Sevastopol at all in May 2026, after everything Ukraine had already demonstrated about its ability to reach high-value targets in Crimea, is not just a tactical error. It is an institutional failure. It reflects a command culture that has not come to terms with the reality that Ukrainian intelligence can find things Russian planners want to hide. The Black Sea Fleet lost ships in Sevastopol harbor. It lost logistics infrastructure in Crimea, and yet, it kept some of its most senior operational coordinators in a building 4 kilometers from the harbor, behind a civilian facade that Ukrainian intelligence stripped away in the first 2 weeks of surveillance. Someone made a calculation that the cover was sufficient. Someone was catastrophically wrong, and 3 admirals went offline because of it. 22 seconds of impact. But the operation was not over, because the question Ukrainian strike planners had spent 11 weeks preparing to answer was not just whether the missiles would hit, it was whether the effect would be what they needed. And measuring that effect, in the hours after the strike, in the behavior of Russian naval operations over the following 48 hours, is where Operation Silent Admiral gets its real significance. The first indication came within minutes. Ukrainian signals intelligence assets monitoring Russian military communications in Crimea and the Black Sea detected a collapse in the communication patterns associated with the administrative building. Frequencies that had been active, encrypted traffic flowing between the building and Black Sea Fleet operational elements, went silent at 11:52 p.m. and did not re-establish. The rooftop communications array was gone, and whatever backup communications capability had existed inside the building was destroyed or compromised in the strike. Russian military emergency response began within approximately 8 minutes. Fire response vehicles arrived. Military security cordoned the area. But the response was, based on Ukrainian OSINT analyst assessments from communications intercepts and timing, notably confused. The building's actual military function created an immediate problem for Russian emergency management. The official response had to treat a military command annex as if it were a civilian administrative facility, because that was its public designation. Communications about the incident, in the initial minutes, were routed through civilian emergency channels rather than military ones. A delay that cost critical minutes in the effort to understand what had happened and re-establish command connectivity. What do you think was maintaining the fiction of the building's civilian status worth the operational risk? Russia bet that secrecy was better protection than hardening. The evidence suggests that bet failed badly. Tell us in the comments. The 3 senior fleet officers whose command channels went silent in the 90 minutes after the strike were subsequently identified in Ukrainian GUR and open source reporting as holding positions in the coordination and logistics oversight structure of the Black Sea Fleet. Their precise fates remain, as of the current date, unconfirmed in official statements from either side. Russian military information management regarding casualties of this nature is tightly controlled. What Ukrainian intelligence and open-source analysis can confirm is that their command channels, the specific encrypted communication nodes associated with their positions, did not re-establish in the 48 hours following the strike. The behavioral signature of Russian naval operations in the western Black Sea over the following 2 days was, in Ukrainian military assessment, consistent with a command disruption of significant severity. 2 scheduled resupply runs to Novorossiysk, which Ukrainian intelligence had been tracking through vessel movement patterns and signals, were canceled without explanation on May 28th and May 29th. The patrol patterns of Russian naval assets in the western Black Sea, movements that Ukrainian analysis had characterized as relatively consistent over the preceding 6 weeks, became erratic. Vessels that had been operating on predictable rotational schedules deviated from those schedules. Coordination between surface elements and shore-based command showed gaps. Response times to tasking requests that should, based on historical intercept patterns, have been answered in minutes, instead took hours. Ukrainian General Staff reports, released in a statement on May 29, 2026, assessed that the strike had degraded Black Sea Fleet Western operational coordination capability by an estimated 60 to 70% for a period of no less than 72 hours. Satellite imagery analysis conducted by multiple commercial providers and shared with open-source analysts confirmed the structural damage to the target building. The northwestern section of the upper floors visibly collapsed, debris field extending into the access road, the vehicle ramp to the basement parking garage blocked by structural material from the main building. If you believe tactics win wars, and specifically that the kind of patient, intelligence-driven, precisely executed tactics Ukraine demonstrated on May 27th will ultimately determine the outcome of this conflict, type Steel Front in the comments. The most surprising thing about this operation, when you look at it fully, isn't the precision of the missile strike, it's the patience. 11 weeks of surveillance, 11 weeks of resisting the temptation to act on partial intelligence, to strike before the picture was complete, to use the window before it closed. The GUR and Ukraine's long-range strike planners had, presumably, multiple opportunities to act on what they were learning about this building before late May. They chose to wait until they had everything: the shift schedules, the vehicle inventory, the communication frequencies, the optimal entry vectors, the diversion plan that would pull Russian radar attention the wrong direction. That patience was the operation's most significant weapon, and it is the characteristic of Ukrainian military planning that Russia has most consistently underestimated throughout this war. The Magura V5 drones, meanwhile, had completed their diversion task. Having successfully drawn Russian radar and defensive attention seaward during the critical window of the missile approach, both drones executed their withdrawal navigation, returning along pre-programmed routes to their recovery point. Both were recovered successfully, according to Ukrainian Naval Drone Command statements released after the operation. 2 drones, 0 losses, mission accomplished. The intelligence operation had one additional complication that the GUR's reconstruction, shared selectively with Ukrainian media in the days after the strike, reveals. In the 3rd week of May, approximately 10 days before the planned strike date, GUR handlers received a signal from a human intelligence source inside the target building's support network, indicating that the building's occupancy pattern might be changing, that senior staff might be relocating. The source's signal was ambiguous. It could have meant the GUR's target was about to disappear. It could have meant Russian counterintelligence had become aware of Ukrainian surveillance. The GUR's decision, made at the directorate level, was to accelerate the strike timeline rather than stand down. The original strike window had been planned for early June. The decision was made to move it to late May, accepting a compressed final preparation phase rather than risk losing the target entirely. That decision was validated when post-strike analysis confirmed the senior staff had, in fact, been in the building on the night of May 27th. The human source's signal had been noise, not signal, but the GUR had no way of knowing that in advance. They made a judgment call under time pressure with incomplete information, and it was correct. One detail that stuck with me going through the reconstruction of this operation: the strike was executed on a Tuesday night. Not a weekend, not a holiday, an ordinary Tuesday. Russian military planners presumably considered that the building's overnight operational sessions, running throughout the week, were sufficiently obscured by the civilian facade to be safe, regardless of the day. What the GUR demonstrated is that when your surveillance has been running for 11 weeks, there is no safe day. Every shift, every overnight session, every vehicle movement, all of it logged. The calendar doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is whether your cover is real. It wasn't. In the aftermath of the strike, 3 things were demonstrated that will have lasting implications for how both sides approach high-value target planning. First, combining naval drone diversion with air-delivered precision munitions works, and it works well. The Magura V5 drones in this operation were not carrying their standard warhead payloads. They were carrying electronic warfare equipment configured specifically for the diversion role. This represents a significant expansion of the Magura platform's operational utility, from a direct attack weapon to a multi-role system capable of shaping the electromagnetic and attentional environment for other strike elements. Ukrainian naval drone development, which has already demonstrated the ability to reach targets deep inside Russian-controlled waters, is now also demonstrating the ability to serve as a precision strike enabler. Second, The BROACH warhead on the Storm Shadow performed as designed against a reinforced target. Russian military construction in Crimea since 2014 has incorporated hardening into key facilities, reinforced concrete floors, blast-resistant structural elements. The sequential impact of missiles 2 and 3 on the upper floors, using the BROACH's penetrating munition design to defeat that hardening, generated a progressive structural failure that a single impact might not have achieved. The 4-missile sequencing in this strike was not redundancy, it was engineering. Third, and most significant, the GUR's 11-week surveillance operation demonstrated that there is no such thing as a hidden military facility in the age of layered multi-source intelligence. Satellite imagery, signals intelligence, human source networks, and open-source analysis, when integrated effectively, can strip the cover from any facility that functions as a military node regardless of its public designation. Russia's reliance on civilian facades as protection, a pattern seen not just in this case but across multiple high-value facilities in occupied Ukrainian territory, has been systematically dismantled by the intelligence architecture Ukraine has built and refined since 2022. For Russia's Black Sea Fleet, May 27, 2026 was not simply a bad night. It was the latest in a sequence of increasingly severe degradations to a naval force that entered this conflict as one of Russia's most significant conventional military assets and has been progressively worn down in ships, logistics infrastructure, operational reach, and now command capability through Ukrainian innovation, patience, and precision. The fleet that in 2022 could project power across the northwestern Black Sea and threaten Odessa from the sea can, by mid-2026, barely maintain logistics connectivity between its remaining vessels and its eastern Black Sea bases. Naval drones took the ships, HIMARS and cruise missiles took the logistics infrastructure. And on May 27th, a 4-missile Storm Shadow salvo and 2 electronic warfare drones took the command node, trying to coordinate whatever remained. Will this pattern of attrition continue? Comment yes or no. Because the next phase of Black Sea Fleet operations, and whether Russia can reconstitute meaningful naval capability in the Western theater before the end of this conflict, is a question Steelfront is going to be tracking closely. The answer to the quiz from earlier. Ukraine destroyed all 6 command vehicles in the basement parking garage. Not 2, not 4, all 6. Missile 4's BROACH warhead penetrated the garage ceiling slab and detonated inside the vehicle storage area. 4 vehicles were destroyed directly by the warhead detonation and the resulting fireball. The remaining 2 sustained damage from the partial collapse of the ceiling section above the explosion point, rendering them non-functional. Ukrainian sources confirmed all 6 vehicles as destroyed or disabled in their post-strike assessment, a conclusion corroborated by satellite imagery showing the vehicle ramp blocked by structural debris from the main building. The evacuation option, 6 vehicles preloaded with portable communications equipment and operational documents, was eliminated in under a second. The complete tactical lesson of Operation Silent Admiral is this: modern precision strike against a hardened, disguised military target is not primarily a function of the weapons employed. It is a function of the intelligence that precedes them. The Storm Shadow is an exceptional weapon, but 4 Storm Shadow missiles striking a building that Russian planners successfully hid would have destroyed an empty office. What made May 27, 2026, a command crisis for the Black Sea Fleet was 11 weeks of surveillance work that found a building Russia was certain could not be found. The weapons were the final 10 seconds of a 3-month operation. That is the lesson that both Russia and every military establishment watching this conflict needs to internalize. In the current intelligence environment, there is no hiding place for a military command node. There is only the question of how long it takes to be found. 3 questions for the Steelfront community. Was accelerating the strike timeline, moving from early June to late May because of ambiguous intelligence about possible target relocation, the right call? The GUR made a judgment under uncertainty, and it was validated by events. but it was also a calculated risk taken on incomplete information. What would you have done? Could Russia have protected the Black Sea Fleet command annex from this strike if it had taken different precautions, hardening communications redundancy, moving senior staff more frequently, implementing better electronic emissions discipline? Or was the facility's discovery inevitable once Ukrainian surveillance had identified the pattern? And the question I think matters most: what does this operation tell us about where the center of gravity in this war actually is? Not on the frontline trenches, not in the air defense duels, but in the intelligence networks and long-range strike capability that Ukraine has built into something capable of reaching into the deepest assumed safe spaces in occupied territory and turning off the lights. Subscribe to Steel Front, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The administrative district in Sevastopol, where that building stood, is quieter now. The debris has been partly cleared. The facade Russia maintained, the civilian signage, the unremarkable exterior, the cover that was supposed to make it invisible, is gone. What remains is a structural shell and a command vacuum that took the Black Sea Fleet the better part of a week to partially fill. Silent reminders that modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy. Real tactics, real consequences. Steel Front.